HOA tried to ban my Christmas lights. I turned my house into Times Square. It went viral. I sued them. I won. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go put up my Christmas lights. It's never too early, right? Okay. So maybe I went a little overboard fighting with my neighborhood HOA, but they really have a way to get under your skin. Willow Creek Estates. Sounds fancy, right? It's not. It's your typical suburban sprawl, manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, houses so close together you can hear your neighbors snoring. The kind of place where everyone drives a minivan, and the biggest excitement is the annual neighborhood barbecue, which, I gotta admit, is pretty good. Cookie-cutter suburbia at its finest. Except for one thing. My house. See, my house is the black sheep of Willow Creek. It's different. It's older, for one. Like, way older. My grandparents built it back in the 60s, long before Willow Creek Estates was even a twinkle in some developer's eye. Back when it was just a bunch of fields and a couple of scattered farmhouses. They built it themselves, with their own 2 hands. It's a little bit quirky, a little bit rustic, I guess you could say. It's got these weird angles and a mismatched roofline, and the paint job is, let's just say it's vintage. It's definitely not winning any architectural awards, but it's my house. And it's got character, which is more than I can say for the rest of the neighborhood. Now, Willow Creek Estates, as it exists today, is heavily HOA controlled. Think perfectly trimmed hedges, strict rules about lawn length, and a whole laundry list of aesthetic guidelines that basically boil down to everything must be beige. Seriously, I swear the HOA president's favorite color is oatmeal. They've got rules about everything, from the color of your mailbox to the type of flowers you're allowed to plant. It's insane. They even have a rule about, wait for it, the height of your Christmas lights. I'm not even kidding. But here's the kicker. My house? It's not technically part of the HOA. Grandpa, being the legend he was, somehow managed to avoid getting sucked into their bureaucratic vortex. Something about a pre-existing property clause or some legal mumbo-jumbo. I don't really understand the specifics, but the important thing is, I'm exempt. I'm the one house in Willow Creek Estates that doesn't have to follow the rules. And every Christmas I like to remind them of that. Okay, so the HOA. Where do I even begin? It's like a hive mind of beige-loving, rule-obsessed busybodies. And leading this charge of suburban conformity is none other than Mrs. Mildred McMillan, or as I like to call her, the HOAzilla. Seriously, this woman makes Attila the Hun look like a cuddly teddy bear. Mrs. McMillan is the HOA president. Of course she is. She's got that whole I'm in charge vibe going on, complete with the power suit and the perpetually pursed lips. I swear she probably has a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws on her nightstand. She's obsessed with aesthetics, which in her world translates to everything must look exactly the same and be as boring as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if she has a secret stash of beige paint in her garage. My grandparents had their fair share of run-ins with the HOA back in the day. Grandpa, being the stubborn old cuss he was, refused to conform to their ridiculous rules. There was the Great Lawn Gnome Incident of '98, the Rosebush Rebellion of '03, and of course, the infamous flagpole fiasco of '07. Grandma told me stories about how Mrs. McMillan, then just a lowly HOA foot soldier, would leave passive-aggressive notes about their non-compliant landscaping. It was a constant battle, a war of wills fought with garden gnomes and passive-aggressive stationery. Now, about the Christmas lights. See, this is a thing in my family. It's a tradition, a source of pride, and a way to honor my grandparents' memory. Every year, we go all out with the decorations. Not crazy, over-the-top insane, mind you, just impressive. Think thousands of twinkling lights, festive wreaths, inflatable snowmen, the non-offensive kind, of course, and maybe a light-up reindeer or 2. It's a classic Christmas display, the kind that makes kids smile and adults feel nostalgic. It's always been a big deal, something we look forward to every year, and it's always been my thing. My way of keeping the Christmas spirit alive in a neighborhood that's slowly being suffocated by beige conformity. Until this year. So it's a cold December morning. The kind where you can smell the snow in the air and you just know it's going to be a perfect Christmas. I'm sipping my coffee, admiring my handiwork. The Christmas lights are up, twinkling merrily, casting a glow on the front of my house. Everything's perfect. Or so I thought. Then the mailman comes, and amongst the junk mail and bills is the letter. You know the kind. Crisp white envelope, official-looking font, the kind of thing that makes your stomach drop even before you open it. Yep, it's from the HOA. Of course it is. I sigh, grab the letter, and head back inside. I already know what it's going to say. It's the same thing every year. Or, well, it was the same thing every year. Usually, they just send a general friendly reminder about holiday decorations, blah, blah, blah. But this year, they've upped their game. I open the letter, and there it is, in all its bureaucratic glory. It starts off all polite and friendly, you know, season's greetings, happy holidays, the whole shebang. But then, it gets down to business, and it's not good. Dear Mr. Henderson, it reads, because they always use my full name, like I'm some kind of criminal. It has come to the attention of the Willow Creek Estates Architectural Harmony Committee. Yes, they actually have a committee for that. That your holiday decorations are, shall we say, not in compliance with the newly established aesthetic guidelines. Aesthetic guidelines? Seriously? What does that even mean? It's like they just made up a bunch of fancy words to justify their need to control every aspect of our lives. I keep reading, and it gets worse. Specifically, the letter continues, your use of multicolored lights, inflatable decorations, and illuminated figures is deemed to be excessive and detracts from the overall visual harmony of the neighborhood. Multicolored lights? Excessive? Are they serious? I mean, come on. It's Christmas. It's supposed to be colorful and festive and, well, fun. But apparently the HOA has decided that fun is a four-letter word. And then, the kicker. They actually have a section in these guidelines dedicated to holiday decorations, and it's a masterpiece of vague, subjective nonsense. It says things like, decorations must be tasteful and in keeping with the overall character of the neighborhood. Displays should be of a reasonable size and scale. Lighting must be subtle and not overly bright. Tasteful? Reasonable? Subtle? These are all code words for beige and boring. It's like they want us all to live in a Christmas-themed retirement home. The letter concludes with the usual threats. Failure to comply with these guidelines may result in fines and/or legal action. Because, of course it does. They always have to throw in the legal threats. It's like their favorite Christmas carol. I crumple up the letter, after reading it about 5 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, and I let out a sigh. Here we go again. Another year, another battle with the HOA. But this year, I'm not backing down. This year, I'm going to give them a Christmas light display they'll never forget. All right, so the HOA sent their little aesthetic guidelines decree, and I, of course, wasn't having it. I mean, come on, tasteful Christmas lights? That's like saying fun dentist appointment. It's an oxymoron. So I sat down and drafted a response. Polite, but firm. I started off by thanking them for their concern regarding my holiday decorations. Then, I dropped the bomb. As you may or may not be aware, I wrote, my property is legally exempt from the Willow Creek Estates HOA regulations due to a pre-existing property clause, otherwise known as a grandfather clause. I even attached a copy of the original property deed just to rub it in. Boom. I went on to explain that my grandparents built this house before the HOA even existed, and that their property rights were grandfathered in. It's like some kind of legal shield against beige conformity. I finished the letter with a cheerful, happy holidays and sent it off, feeling pretty smug. I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. So wrong. The HOA did not take this well. Not at all. It was like I'd poked a beehive with a stick, except the bees were armed with passive-aggressive stationery and a burning desire to micromanage my life. The letters started coming more frequently. Instead of just the annual, friendly reminder, I was getting weekly missives about non-compliant landscaping. My lawn was, admittedly, a little shaggy. And, Unauthorized holiday decor. Apparently, my inflatable snowman was deemed excessive. They even sent me a letter about improperly positioned garbage cans, even though they were exactly where they were supposed to be. It was ridiculous. And then the fines started. Fake fines, of course. Violation of Holiday Decoration Guideline 42B, excessive cheerfulness. Unauthorized snowman placement. Improper use of twinkling lights. They were literally making this stuff up. It was like they were playing Mad Libs with the HOA bylaws. The tension was definitely escalating. I was getting more and more frustrated. I felt like I was being targeted, harassed, bullied by a bunch of beige-obsessed bureaucrats. It was like they were on a mission to make my life as miserable as possible. The neighbors, initially pretty neutral about the whole thing, started to take notice. Some of them, the ones who were also fed up with the HOA's ridiculous rules, secretly admired my defiance. They'd give me a thumbs up when they drove by, or leave encouraging notes on my door. Others, the more conformist types, were worried. They were afraid that my little rebellion would somehow affect property values, or worse, that Mrs. McMillan would unleash her wrath on them next. It was like a mini-drama unfolding in Willow Creek Estates, me versus the HOA, the grandfather clause versus the aesthetic guidelines. It was turning into a full-blown Christmas war. And I, armed with my legal documents and my ever-growing collection of inflatable snowmen, was ready to fight. Okay, so the HOA wanted a war? Fine. They wanted a show? Even better. But they weren't going to get some angry, vandalism-fueled rampage. No, I was going to fight fire with Christmas cheer, and I was going to do it in a way that would make Mrs. McMillan's head spin faster than a dreidel on Hanukkah. If they want a show, I thought, I'll give them a show they'll never forget. I started plotting. This wasn't just about adding a few more lights. This was about going full-blown, over-the-top, Clark Griswold on steroids level of Christmas decoration madness. I was going to turn my house into Times Square South. First, the lights. Forget the measly few thousand I had up before. I'm talking tens of thousands of LEDs, all synchronized to music. I found this awesome program online that lets you create custom light shows. I spent hours programming the lights to dance and twinkle and change colors in perfect harmony with classic Christmas carols. Think Trans-Siberian Orchestra meets, well, me. Then, the animatronics. I found these giant inflatable Santas online. Not just your average Santa waving from the porch. These guys were doing the Macarena. Yes, you read that right. Macarena dancing Santas. I strategically placed them in the front yard so they'd be the first thing anyone saw when they drove by. And because why not, I added a snow machine. I figured if the HOA wanted aesthetics, they should get the full winter wonderland experience. So, every few hours, my front yard would be transformed into a flurry of artificial snow. It was magical, and slightly ridiculous. Of course, no Christmas display is complete without music. I set up a sound system and programmed it to play a carefully curated selection of holiday tunes. Not just jingle bells on repeat, mind you. I'm talking classic carols, jazzy Christmas tunes, and even a few rockin' holiday songs thrown in for good measure. Think Bing Crosby meets Mariah Carey meets, well, me again. And finally, because I'm extra, I got a projector and started projecting Christmas movies onto the side of my house. It's a Wonderful Life, Elf, Home Alone, the whole shebang. It was like having a drive-in movie theater in my front yard. The transformation took weeks. I spent every spare minute working on it, stringing lights, setting up animatronics, programming the music and the light show. I was covered in glitter, tinsel, and fake snow. My house looked like a Christmas explosion had happened, and I loved it. Finally, the day came for the grand reveal. I invited a few neighbors over for a lighting ceremony, mostly as an excuse to show off my handiwork. I flipped the switch and, well, let's just say jaws dropped. The lights danced, the Santa's Macarena ed, the snow fell, and the music played. It was a spectacle, a Christmas extravaganza. Well, a giant middle finger to the HOA. The neighbors were stunned. Then they started laughing. Then they started cheering. Even the grumpiest old guy on the street cracked a smile. It was like I'd single-handedly brought Christmas cheer to Willow Creek Estates, and it was glorious. Okay, so Times Square South was a hit. I knew it would be, but I didn't realize how big of a hit. Turns out someone, probably Mrs. Higgins, bless her heart, recorded a video of the whole light show and posted it online. And then it went viral. Like really viral. I woke up the next morning to find my phone blowing up with notifications. The video had been shared thousands of times. People were commenting, liking, and generally losing their minds over my Christmas extravaganza. And then the local news called. They wanted to do a story. About me. About my lights. About the HOA. They framed it as local homeowner stands up to tyrannical HOA over Christmas decorations. I did a quick interview, trying to be as articulate and charming as possible, while still rocking my pajamas, because, hey, it was early. I explained the whole grandfather clause thing, the petty fines, the aesthetic guidelines nonsense. I even threw in a few jokes about beige paint and Macarena dancing Santas. The news story aired that night, and the internet exploded. Suddenly, I was the Christmas hero of Willow Creek Estates. People were calling me the Light Bringer, the Christmas Crusader, and even Saint Nick's Little Helper. It was insane. And the HOA? Oh, they were not happy. They became the target of public ridicule. People were calling them Grinches, Scrooges, and even worse. I'm not going to repeat some of the things I saw online. Their website crashed from all the negative comments. Someone even photoshopped Mrs. McMillan's face onto the Grinch. It was brutal. They were forced to respond to the media, and they made it even worse. They tried to defend their aesthetic guidelines, which just made them sound even more out of touch and ridiculous. They even tried to claim that my light show was a public nuisance. A public nuisance. It was Christmas lights for crying out loud. Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek Estates, my neighbors, who were initially hesitant about my over-the-top decorations, were now fully on my side. They realized that the HOA's rules were ridiculous and that my light show was actually pretty awesome. They even started a petition to support my right to decorate my house however I wanted. It was like a Christmas miracle. And then, the cherry on top. A lawyer contacted me. He'd seen the news story, he'd seen the online reaction, and he offered to represent me and other homeowners who were sick of the HOA's rules pro bono in a lawsuit against the HOA. He saw this as a chance to take down the HOA and its oppressive reign of beige terror. He said, "This isn't just about Christmas lights, Mr. Henderson. This is about freedom." And honestly, I was starting to believe him. So, the lawyer, this guy named Mr. Thompson, ironically, he looked a bit like Santa Claus, but in a lawyerly way, was serious. He was all about freedom and property rights and taking down the man, which in this case was the HOA. He filed a lawsuit against them, arguing that their rules were unreasonable, arbitrary, and violated, well, pretty much every right a homeowner has. He even cited some obscure legal precedent about the right to decorate your house with Macarena dancing Santas. Okay, maybe not that last part, but it felt like it. The media, of course, ate it up. The Christmas lights lawsuit became a national sensation. Every news outlet, from CNN to the local paper, was covering the story. They interviewed me, they interviewed Mr. Thompson, they even tried to interview Mrs. McMillan, who, predictably, refused to comment. The HOA was under a microscope, and they were not looking good. Facing mounting legal pressure and public ridicule, the HOA started to crumble. Members resigned in droves. Mrs. McMillan, bless her beige-loving heart, was forced to step down as president. I heard she moved to Florida, probably to a community with even stricter rules. Karma's a beach, isn't it? Eventually, the HOA caved. They settled the lawsuit. They agreed to revise their rules, removing all the ridiculous restrictions on holiday decorations and, hopefully, everything else. They even issued a public apology, which, let's be honest, probably hurt Mrs. McMillan more than anything. And me? Well, I became a local hero. The guy who fought the HOA and won. The Christmas light champion of Willow Creek Estates. People would stop me on the street to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the beige tyranny. It was surreal. Looking back on the whole thing, it's hard not to laugh. It all started with a letter about aesthetic guidelines and ended with a national legal battle. Did I achieve my goal? Absolutely. I wanted to decorate my house for Christmas, and I did it in a way that made a point. Did I go too far? Probably. But honestly, I don't regret a thing. The whole experience taught me a few things. It taught me that community is important, even in a place like Willow Creek Estates, where everyone's so busy trying to keep up with the Joneses, or in this case, the McMillans. It taught me that standing up for what you believe in is worth it, even if it means facing a bunch of angry bureaucrats. And it taught me that Christmas lights have a power all their own. They can bring people together, they can spark joy, and they can even take down an HOA. So, here's my final thought. Don't let anyone tell you that your Christmas lights are excessive. Don't let anyone dim your holiday spirit. And if you happen to live in an HOA-controlled neighborhood, well, maybe invest in some Macarena dancing Santas. Just kidding, mostly. TLDR, HOA tried to ban my Christmas lights. I turned my house into Times Square. It went viral. I sued them. I won. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go put up my Christmas lights. It's never too early, right?